that. Okay, our AI just kicked in. So, obviously, Dennis is, they're looking at really mining as the major topic for economic development and the sticks and bricks side of it. I mean, I think it's so important. I mean, obviously, that's part of what we're focusing on, and in the state, to try to modify our data center incentives so that they apply, to Bitcoin mining. But I mean, my experience has been that we have really, we've got to get out of the echo chambers. I think I mentioned to you in our warm up call that we joined the Utility Economic Developers Association, and that was such a revealing, conference that I went to. The minute I mentioned Bitcoin, which was early in the conference, I just had a collective groan, from the crowd. It was like, I said to myself, we have done a terrible job of educating this group specifically, and they're so important to what we're doing, and even to the point where one of the points that I want to try to encourage Dennis and Eric, to pursue is that it really is a matter of I mean, I actually think it's more important now to get the utility companies on board, as opposed to states, as part of that parallel movement, because, we represent a critical tool for energy management in most states, that where we're competitive, where it's actually operating. And they're just beginning to see it. I mean, obviously, Texas has been the biggest impact of that, and or has had the biggest impact. So, how they quantify it, and how they establish who's doing what or when they need to interrupt, is all part of, how they have to manage their grid with limited production and generation that's in the pipeline right now. So it really is it's an interesting, dilemma, I think, that we have, in terms of, we have so many people that have to get up to speed on this, and to assume that just because they work for a utility company and they've been citing 50 megawatt sites does not mean that they understand what Bitcoin is by any means. So
exactly.
So Doug, thank you for joining us.
Hey,
I'll share it's Doug's birthday today.
Yeah, awesome.
Happy birthday.
Doug's our corporate secretary for South Carolina Emerging Tech, David and Anthony. So let me introduce you to Andrew. Doug, Andrew stopped by the booth at Bitcoin 2023, and that's how we connected. He and his wife had a connection with Folly Beach, so one thing has kind of led to the other.
Excellent. Good to have you.
Good to be here. Yeah, it was a good time.
And unless anybody's got a hard 1:30 stop, if we get this, and I'd like to get a few more people in before we start. We could certainly keep this open beyond 1:30. We had 15 folks that registered for this seating, and just put it out last minute to some of the other groups that the Eventbrite expired at 11:30, so I extended it to 12:30. So we did have a couple of last minutes, as well as posting the Zoom coordinates.
Mr. Apollo, how's your day going?
Yeah,
I'm doing well. I will admit to you, Commissioner Pope, that I had an experience in the Idleman Mansion last night. I got here a little late, all the lights were off, and I'm all the way on the second floor. It sounded like there were a couple of people upstairs banging around on the third floor. I went up there, and there was no one there to be found. So
yes, the Mr. Apollo's office is in the Idleman Mansion in Cheyenne, and it's now owned by the state, and it is a beautiful old mansion that was used as a mortuary.
Hmm.
And when the governor's office was there, there were experiences reported by a number of people. Anthony bragged to me the last time we talked about it that he had none. But apparently the ghosts caught up with him.
With all due respect to myself, I have been on the job for about 10 business days. So it didn't take long.
Well, living in Charleston, we've had, spirit stories, that go back generations, so certainly can empathize, sympathize, as well as recognize it. There's something going on. I don't think, at least from the Charleston perspective. Good heavens, I mean, it's something else. And Anthony, let me introduce you to Andrew. While we have an opportunity, Andrew is sitting in for Dennis Porter. Dennis will be joining us a little later, but Andrew's the lead investigator for chain analysis and doing a lot of work on CBDC research. So thought it would be a good complement to what we're discussing to kind of weigh in the risks and benefits of how this looks in a CBDC world. So we'll give it another minute and we'll just go ahead and get started, and we can get our disclaimers on the record and then go from there. So
if we wait 1 minute, I will say
that's the great thing about a Zoom call, right? I mean, you can show up whenever you want to, I suppose.
And then before you start, I will say
It doesn't mean you're going to start on time, right?
Yes, I will say I probably have a hard stop at that hour mark.
Fair enough. Appreciate it. Yeah. Let's go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and open up the waiting room, and just so anybody else can hop on in. If I can figure out where that is. Let's see. Let's see here. One more second, because I've done this before. Yeah. There, security, that's right. I'm going to disable the waiting room. Okay, great. All right. Well, let's get this road show started. I'm pleased to announce the launch for South Carolina Blockchain Week 2024. The dates are April 24th, 25, and 26th in Charleston. The event is the halving edition, and it's an extension of our South Carolina Blockchain Week 2023, which officially begins today with a series of e-sessions. The first of which is state-by-state lessons from Wyoming. My guests today are David Pope, commissioner with the Wyoming Stable Token Commission, Anthony Apollo, their executive director, Andrew McCarthy with chain analysis, and a little later in this event, Dennis Porter should be chiming in. South Carolina Emerging Tech, just as a brief background, is the trade association South Carolina representing emerging technologies. Our aim is to be the subject matter experts on 12 different critical emerging technologies. We got our basis in blockchain, of course, and have matured the association into one of the, I would say, more organized state associations in the country. And we are building a sustainable model with a membership, and we have a policy initiative that includes expansion of our data center incentives in South Carolina, along with the Sound Money Lobby that has recently joined us, and we have 3 anti-CBDC bills that are currently in our state house and between the General Assembly, between the House of Representatives and the Senate. We made a stable token proposal to the state about 5 years ago. Wyoming has gone much further with it, so we're anxious to learn more of what they're doing. So I'm going to hand over the introductions to David Pope and ask Anthony then to introduce himself, and Andrew as well, and including the disclaimers you may want to attach to this.
Thanks, Dennis. And I'm happy to be here. This is an exciting time for all of us. The first thing I need to say, though, is all opinions, views, extrapolations, and thoughts expressed by me are personal in nature and are not necessarily those of the Wyoming Stable Token Commission or the Wyoming Select Committee on Blockchain, Financial Technology, and Digital Information Technology. Nothing said here can be considered legal, financial, or tax advice. For such advice, you need to consult your own attorney, financial advisor, or accountant. And I do believe Mr. Apollo, or I should say Director Apollo, will echo that disclaimer as well. So for me, I became involved with the blockchain movement in Wyoming in 2017. I've been an accountant for 36 years, and I've had my own CPA firm in Wyoming since 1996, and my personal journey was that I did not realize the power of blockchain until about 2017, and after reading some of our accounting journals about the technology, it just became clear to me at that point how much power this type of database and ledger system would have, especially for accountants. Wyoming's first legislative endeavor actually took place in 2015 when Tyler Lindholm was a freshman legislator from the northern part of Wyoming, very rural area, and he tried to change the Wyoming Money Transmitter Act. There's a whole story behind that, but I don't know we have time for that. But it was defeated soundly by the legislature. Then in 2017, I was one of the co-founders of the Wyoming Blockchain Coalition, and we put together, and that included Caitlin Long, Tyler Lindholm, Dick McGinnity, who was the president emeritus of the University of Wyoming. It included several other legislators, several business leaders, and economic development organizations within Wyoming. And we went to the legislature and put together an initial package of bills or statutes that we felt would enable the technology in Wyoming. And from that, we were able to change the Money Transmitters Act to exempt cryptocurrencies and transfers of cryptocurrency. We had an Electronic Records Act. We created in Wyoming series LLCs, which that's a form of organization that many developers like to use, and we exempted digital assets from property tax in Wyoming. But the biggest thing we accomplished was we exempted utility tokens from securities law in Wyoming, and we classified them as property as opposed to a security. That was the first time and contained the first language defining a utility token legislatively anywhere in the world. From there, it's just gone forward. We're now upwards of 30 to 35 different and separate enabling pieces of legislation, including creating this special purpose depository institutions, which is a form of state bank that was really, really advances the ability of the banking system to hold digital assets. We can now, corporations in Wyoming can now have blockchain-based shareholder ledgers, tokens as shares. Let's see, we've defined the ability of the courts and the circumstances under which courts can request any of your private keys. We've created the Wyoming Digital Asset Registry, and a number of just huge pieces of legislation that advance the industry here. What I think may turn out to be the biggest is the Stable Token Act, and that's one thing when I first started working toward this, I wanted a Wyoming digital currency, and I was told very quickly that that's unconstitutional. So what we did was we worked over the course of 4 years to create the Stable Token, the Wyoming Stable Token Act, which is not a digital currency at all, but it is a token that is denominated in dollars. And I like to term it as, it is not decentralization of the dollar at all. My term for it is it's decentralization of the delivery of the dollar. So that, in a nutshell, is what we've tried to do in Wyoming. And so, I think I'm going to hand it over to Mr. Apollo, who is the executive director of the Wyoming Stable Token Commission.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner Pope. And I will quickly echo your disclaimer quickly before we get started here. All opinions, views, extrapolations, and thoughts expressed by me are personal in nature and are not necessarily those of the Wyoming Stable Token Commission or the Wyoming Subcommittee on Blockchain, Financial Technology, and Digital Innovation Technology. Nothing said here can be considered legal, financial, or tax advice. For such advice, you will need to consult your own attorney, financial advisor, or accountant. So with that out of the way, a bit of a background on myself, and I appreciate Commissioner Pope giving kind of the Wyoming history. So I'm fairly new here, all things considered. I grew up in New York, spent the first half of my career there, particularly in traditional finance. So banking and capital markets, working in audit and advisory capacities across KPMG, Ernst & Young, and began learning about blockchain in 2015. And just kept attuned to it because Ethereum had just launched several months once I got into this space, and just kind of stayed abreast of what was happening, these kind of massive developments that were occurring every couple of months. That culminated in an opportunity to join a Ethereum incubator called Consensus in September of 2017, where I founded a project with several others called Solarius, which was a decentralized and fan-owned science fiction universe that we created, which had all kinds of proposed tokenized governance models, tokenized intellectual property, using blockchain to pay out revenue shares or royalties for content that was created and purchased. And while that was extremely exciting at the time, it was also very early. There was one NFT project back then, that was CryptoKitties, that had just gunked up Ethereum. There was one governance model back then called the DAO, which everyone probably knows that story if you're listening in. So that was a fairly tumultuous time. So suffice it to say, we were fairly early on that. Led to a couple of twists and turns along the way. Myself and several others in the Solarius team went and started the Consensus Sports vertical within the organization, within the consulting group. That lasted for a few months. Consensus went through a large number of changes in late 2018. Yada yada. Myself and several others spun out our own company called Saffron Solutions, in which we predominantly worked with an NBA athlete named Spencer Dinwiddie to do a debt security token that was launched here in the US. Had some DNA of the Bowie bonds, if you recall those, or also the Pullman bonds. Had a little bit of DNA of Fantex, which was a platform that was doing equity launches for NFL athletes at that time. And that tokenized bond went live on July 2020, actually just hit maturity several months ago, at 3-year term on it. Again, the bond was tokenized, the interest payments went out monthly in stablecoins, and the bullet payment at maturity was also paid out in stablecoins. So I've certainly got some familiarity there. And then while that project was going on, had some fits and starts. Myself and my brothers founded a company called Rensa, which is a multimedia distribution platform. If you're creating games, music, comics, doesn't matter. Upload to our platform, give us the public addresses of your collaborators or co-creators, whoever needs to get paid out and how much. We put that all in a smart contract. And when someone comes and purchases your piece of content with a tokenized license behind it, we can effectuate a payment in real time to all members of your team directly to their digital wallets and totally transparently. That's been kind of the main thing that I've been working on previously, because myself and my brothers did move to Wyoming to get that project off the ground about 2 years ago and change. We came out here because we saw what was happening with this legislative environment. We saw how much movement there was, how much progress there was, and nowhere else really came close. And we were able to find this, an ability to get involved with the meetings around things like the stable token legislation, like the digital asset registry, and just have our voices be heard, which is incredibly impactful coming from a place like New York. And when the stable token commission started looking for an executive director and needed someone with a background that looked a lot like mine, I jumped at the opportunity because I agree with Commissioner Polk. This is a tremendous, tremendous opportunity, not only for the state, not only for the technology, but also for the United States. And I will leave it there.
Yeah, and apparently we're having a technical issue with people getting into the room here. So I was just trying to address it while you were speaking, Anthony. But let me go ahead and I mean, just to kind of reiterate where we are with the conclusion of both Anthony and David's comments is that we do want to specify that Wyoming is not doing a replacement or is not proposing a replacement for the dollar. And but specifically, we're talking about decentralization of the delivery of the dollar. And in doing so, the state is accepting U.S. dollars, in effect, purchasing dollars. And that becomes a debt to the state. And then Wyoming is proposing to use those dollars to purchase U.S. treasuries, and it's limited to that. So this is really a matter of how do we, create a more efficient payment rail using dollars, and so that in the incorporation of smart contracts for and this began really as an initiative in the state at the state level. How do we make the state more efficient, from a process standpoint? Correct, David?
Yes, that's correct. There are two levels to this. What can this do within the state of Wyoming, and then what can it do nationally and internationally? Right now, I think everyone will agree that the international payment system, the settlement system, is not a very good system. And one of the things that stable tokens do is they fill in the gaps within that system and create the ability to have international settlements and in a quick, efficient, and secure manner. The only problem is with much of it that there's no real transparency, or very little transparency, in what's backing the stable tokens. That's where Wyoming comes in. Statutorily, we are required to have at all times, I think, 1.02% or 102% of the stable tokens have to be backed by U.S. Treasuries, and then or either dollars or U.S. Treasuries. Sorry, and then for redemption purposes, there is always security there.
Right, and what a great segue, to Andrew, who is working on the CBDC side. And Andrew, let me ask you to go ahead and introduce yourself. We finally getting some folks on. Apparently, the links are working, so we can provide a recap to everybody that's joining us with the notes that the AI is taking later on. So, Andrew, let me hand it off to you. I mean,
Yep.
transparency, CBDCs, does that actually go hand in hand in open source?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on who's developing it, right? So there's four really main architecture. Well, let me go back into saying my disclaimer background, and then I'll get into a little more of the CBDCs. So my name is Andrew McCarthy. I'm currently a lead investigator with Chainalysis. The views and opinions expressed during this event are my own and do not represent that of my work. While I make every effort to ensure the information I am sharing is accurate, I welcome any comments, suggestions, or corrections of errors, right? So I'm a longtime intelligence analyst. I recently left that role and got into cryptocurrencies, emerging technologies, identifying the threats of AI, CBDCs, Bitcoin, Monero, diving into a lot of that stuff. Recently, I've looked a lot towards CBDCs and the four main architectures. You have your retail, wholesale, a hybrid, and then your synthetic. I'm really looking forward to learning more about the Wyoming stablecoin, just because that is kind of unique and something that I haven't seen as often. You know, I see the Bank for International Settlements Innovation Hub projects, their Enbridge, and a bunch of the different cross-border CBD projects that they're working on. But you know, this tokenized, this stable token that Wyoming is putting together, that's going to be on open networks, if I'm understanding that correctly, is extremely unique. I've often talked about, you know, the need for synthetic CBDCs, so basically a JP Morgan coin or something like that, where they issue that and allow us to actually participate in these cross-border environments like the Enbridge and stuff like that, so we don't get left behind in the future. You know, because it is looking more and more with over 130 countries either testing, exploring, piloting CBDCs. These things are going to become a reality for cross-border payments. So we need to find a way to basically protect individual freedoms and privacy, and also be able to play on that international level with the instant cross-border settlements and transparency there. Go ahead, Dennis.
Dennis, it looks like you're on mute.
Dennis, I believe you're on mute.
There we go. I'm sorry. Let's get back to my questions. Left the scene. But obviously, where CBDCs and stablecoins overlap, where they differ, and you know where they provide different, you know, potential functionalities. I mean, you know, for the state's use versus the federal use. So let me throw this back at both David and Anthony. I mean, what do you see as the potential future use cases for a Wyoming stablecoin? Obviously, we've discussed possibly cross-border settlements, but you know, so you know that is potentially a jumping off point. You know, where do we go from there?
Anthony, do you want to summarize some of the use cases we've already looked at?
Sure. I can offer up my own platform as an example, and I say this knowing full well that you know, my platform is the Brinsa, which I'm no longer actively working on, and Wyoming stable token are two very different things. But I think it gives a great example of why I'm so interested in having a stable token that's available. So we launched Brinsa in early 2022, around the time of ETH Denver. We launched the platform on Ethereum and Polygon. And at the time that we launched, if you would sell a video game for about 4 Matic on Polygon, well, one Matic would have been worth $1.30. If you were to look at the pricing charts now, Matic is around 50 to 60 cents, depending on. So when we got feedback from our initial users, they had concerns not only about the volatility of how they were being paid on the currency, but also around the implications, right? So if you have that's $1.30 and then $50, well, now you have potentially capital gains application. So conversely, if you get one Matic at $1.30 and that makes sense, well, you've lost almost half your money. So there's a very clear need for stable tokens in any kind of commerce that's going to be on chain. We could talk about large cross-border settlements, but let's not forget that the digital media entertainment industry is $630 billion a year moving around. And all that money goes through some centralized party, right? If you're on Spotify as an artist, you're getting 0.0005 cents per streamer, these 3 zeros. But you're not getting much, and someone's doing back end accounting for that on a system that's completely opaque to you as the creator, which you derive your value from. There are systems in place on blockchain where all that is readily transparent. You don't need the middleman. Same thing for any games, comics, no matter what you're distributing, doing it digitally, someone else is touching the money. And we don't need that anymore. And stable tokens, I believe, are the best way to effectuate those peer-to-peer transactions without having those intermediaries. And Dave, I'll turn over to you now.
So when you also look at that would be in itself an incredible use case right there. But think about how easy it would be to bundle municipal bonds once you have the infrastructure in place to create the stable token. Bundle them, bundle the tokens in $10,000 increments, and then offer them as municipal bonds or state issued bonds in order to fund large projects, and do so electronically. This is and in that case, whereas right now the stable token does not anticipate offering any sort of return on your purchase of a stable token, you could easily add that as a feature in the future. Think about how easy intrastate payments could become between city, county, and state within the state of Wyoming. Delivery of social services, use cases there, which honestly, a lot of those use cases, Senator Rothfuss in Wyoming, the state senator that originally put forth this legislation in 22, he, in one of our commission meetings, said that outright that, this doesn't have to have an out-of-state or an international use in order to be useful to the state of Wyoming. And I think that's an incredible statement right there, that if we can do this, it can be good for the state, regardless of whether any of the other use cases become available.
There we go. We're really hitting on certainly the efficiencies, I think, which brought us all into this industry, recognizing that this is really about payments in the long run, whether domestic, local, international, whatever the case may be, and how this technology, blockchain specifically, Bitcoin as the initial iteration, can make payments more efficient, at all levels. But how does that potentially differ, between Andrew, what you're seeing at the CBDC level, at the international level, potentially with a state level, and then the benefits of having a state stable coin, for settlement, as I understand it, is that international settlements have to go through a U.S. bank in some manner or another, so even if it's an instantaneous transfer, or that has to take place. I mean, we just can't really do that right now with the existing system. Is that?
Yeah. So what I'm seeing around the world, and a lot of the use cases and data is coming out of China. What we're seeing is them develop a private blockchain that is not open to the public to see, so the public won't be able to see transactions like they can on Ethereum or Bitcoin. A lot of that stuff is going to be, they called it managed anonymity. So like only very specific people and organizations, you know, the state banks, whether it be construction bank or one of the agricultural bank, the Bank of China, only them will be able to see the different monetary flows and the account-based system that is being built on the ECNY. Whereas, you know, what Wyoming, from my understanding, what Wyoming is doing with a state stable token is putting it on public blockchains, creating transparency, which is very different than central bank digital currencies that are trying to really balance, you know, individual privacy as well as the AML and the counter terrorist financing regulatory compliance issues that are coming out of things like the FATF and some other organizations. So, you know, the state stable tokens are going to be, from my understanding, a lot more public, whereas the CBDCs are going to be private chains, permission blockchains that are very released in controlled environments. If I would be really interesting to hear what type of control Wyoming stable token will have. Will it be able to go international? Will international people be able to interact with that, hold the state stable token, and interact in other ecosystems with it? So, for example, would you be able to, instead of saying using USDC, using the Wyoming stable token and Aave and other DeFi type apps like that?
I'll let Anthony talk to the technical side of that, but certainly the goal is for the international community to be able to use the stable token, whether immediately or in the future. At least that's been my intent all along. And as far as, you know, CBDCs, there's come about a distrust of that technology within the United States, whether good or bad. There is a distrust on the part of the public of an electronic currency that can monitor everyone's every move. And Wyoming, at least what I'd like to see from Wyoming, is the ability to balance that federal control with Wyoming control, still having the KYC, AML, all of those regulations being followed, but remove some of the more concerning features that a CBDC would bring to the table. So, and on the technical side of that, Anthony, maybe you can answer some of the depth of the question that Andrew has brought up.
Yes. So first and foremost, one thing I'd say is kind of a framing here is that nothing on our side is set in stone. If you had a chance to attend any of our public commission meetings, there have been multiple different discussions around the types of tokens that may be issued to this agency. There's been no commitment to building on a specific chain, although I would say we are probably tacking in the direction of using a public chain. I would personally like to use a public chain. I think that's where the strength of the network comes from, and this technology comes from, by having and it's likely in business plan that, as the big public, does use the ERC20 token as the if you look at where the volume is on the public chains, it's going to be not only on Ethereum, but networks, which are compatible with the Ethereum virtual machine, which would include things like Polygon, Optimism, Arbitrum, which are a lot of the different scalability solutions that make transactions on these chains more efficient. I want to throw Avalanche in that bucket too. Beyond that, there's also chains like Cardano and Tezos that are also investigating EVM compatibility. So it seems like that's the Schelling point for most people building in this space. That being said, there's also a number of chains that are focused on privacy, Zcash, Monero, and people from those teams have spun up their own initiatives recently, which would be another kind of interesting exploration, because those are chains where you have privacy built in from day one. I also want to kind of make sure we balance this right, that I'm talking about building on publicly available blockchains, permissionless blockchains, as opposed to what the big banks are building. But I also want to strive for privacy in transactions made by individual citizens. And I think it's rather serendipitous that, just like as an example, the privacy pools paper that was published by Vitalik, several others, showing how these transactions could be done on Ethereum. I believe that was put out a day before my appointment to this position. So all to say is we've got a ton of decisions to make in front of us. I have been brought in to help kind of streamline that process and kind of create the roadmap to show where we should be going. But my take personally is we should be on several chains over time, and we should be exploring who can provide the best balance of public data where needed, but private anonymity for citizens, as they should have it. And I'll echo our state treasurer, Kurt Meyer, who I spoke with the CAS for a few weeks back. His take was, whether you're buying bullets or bubble gum, it should be fairly anonymous when you're an individual. And Dennis, with your on you.
Take a moment. I see Dennis Porter has joined us, and I will add that this originally began as a segment for the kickoff for our April conference, the countdown to the halving. It was originally planned with Caitlin Long, and takes 5 of us to fill up one Caitlin Long shoes. So with that, Dennis, I'll hand it over to you and kind of go into your little introduction on what you're doing with Satoshi Action Fund and where you see some of the state initiatives are going. And then perhaps we can open it up for some questions, or we'll run a little conclusion, then open it for some questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Dennis, thanks for inviting me to participate. Apologies for being late. I was updating the USBC on some of the policy work that we're doing at Satoshi Action, and also where we see ourselves being active in 2024 with state legislators. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Dennis Porter. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Satoshi Action Fund. I'm also the president and founder of Satoshi Action Education. Both of those groups are built with the purpose of going on the offense for Bitcoin and digital assets at the state level. Originally, we started Satoshi Action Fund in June of 2022 with my 2 co-founders. And from there, we crafted 4 pieces of model policy. We took those models and introduced them in 9 states. We were able to get 2 of our bills passed into law, one in Montana and in Arkansas. During our experience, we realized 2 things. One, in Montana, we realized that we can add more language to the bill than just protections for Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining, which is what that bill set out to do. We were able to also ban additional taxes on Bitcoin when used as a form of payment in that state. The second thing that we learned was that we needed a lot more research. So we launched Satoshi Action Education, which is a research arm of Satoshi Action Fund. That entity has spun up quite rapidly. We were able to attract Dr. Murray Rudd, who has over 20 years of academic experience. And he has worked in the Canadian government. He's worked in the UN and has been a professor at universities across the world. Fortunately, due to the ability to attract Dr. Murray Rudd, we have been able to produce a significant amount of papers and also help others get their papers through the peer review process. It's very difficult to get papers through the peer review process that have a positive tone for Bitcoin, particularly Bitcoin mining right now, given that academia views Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining as a waste and that it should not be able to basically function at all. So finding good reviewers, finding good journals who will even be open to accepting any sort of publication that doesn't get desk rejected is very difficult. But because of Dr. Murray's experience and also because of his experience being an editor at multiple journals, we've been able to find a journal that has been more friendly to our publications. And we are also actively seeking out other journals as well that are going to be friendly towards Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining papers. The one paper that we did get through the peer review process recently was from the University of College London. It was researched. The research was done by Juan and Alex, both really great researchers over there at UCL. And essentially, the title of the paper is Bitcoin's Carbon Footprint Revisited, and essentially goes through and breaks down how Bitcoin mining is actually a powerful tool for enhancing renewable energy generation. It's also got pieces in there that talk about the methane mitigation and grid balancing benefits of Bitcoin mining. So all that research is used essentially to help us pass better policy in the United States, help policymakers make better decisions around Bitcoin and digital assets so that we can have the United States be a global leader on Bitcoin mining and digital assets the same way as it's been a global leader on internet and tech for the last several decades. So I'll stop there. Other than to say that we're very excited about 2024. We've taken our right to mine bill and we've adapted it to the Blockchain Basics Act, which houses the right to mine bill, but also has protections for self-custody, protects your use of digital assets. It eliminates additional taxes on Bitcoin or digital assets when used as a form of payment. There's a de minimis exemption. It protects the ability to operate a node, and also protects layer twos, and also protects consensus mechanisms in a tech neutral way. So that policy potentially could be passed in up to 20 states. I wouldn't say it will be 20, it'd probably be more like 6 to 10, depending on how fortunate we are and how the political headwinds move as we move forward from here. Last note is that last year, or last cycle this year, when we passed our right to mine bill, and we introduced it in 7 states and passed it in 2, that was in the midst of the FTX collapse. So we are very confident about our ability to pass policy, given that the current headwinds, although flatlined, are definitely not in the middle of an FTX collapse. So we were very, very confident about the potential to move the states forward and use them as a bulwark against federal action, which is sort of core to the mission of our organization. Anyways, I'll stop there. Dennis, love what you're doing. We're really excited about South Carolina and excited about coming there when you do your next conference.
Yeah, and let me I mean, that kind of just dovetail into what you're talking about, obviously with the stable coins and with what you're doing with with obviously digital asset data centers specifically. I mean, we've seen recent advent of being able to write the stable coins onto the Bitcoin blockchain. I mean, are you talking to anybody about proof of work as a consensus mechanism, for that application, and how that might grow, that particular segment of the market?
Yeah, it's a new development. So we haven't had a whole lot of time to update them on the potential for the new advancements that have been made. I'm a long time Bitcoiner. Well, long time is in Bitcoin terms. I've been in Bitcoin since 2017. And one of the things that I have noticed along the way is that Bitcoin is always one engineering solution away from taking over large swaths of the marketplace. So as you've seen in the past, people said that you couldn't use Bitcoin to buy coffee, that you could not do small transactions on Bitcoin. It's sort of useless as a payment rail. Ultimately, there were engineering solutions that were adopted to Bitcoin. The code was changed in a very small way to allow for the development of the Lightning Network. And the Lightning Network is now used globally. It is used by folks in third world countries as well as here in the United States as a payment solution to be able to use Bitcoin transactions in a way that's instant and nearly free. So I've sort of been a long-term bullish on the potential for Bitcoin to continue to have engineering solutions come out occasionally that unlock new swaths of the marketplace. So I'm really interested to see how this development will take place. I'm not a technical guy, so I don't really understand the inner workings of it. Couldn't explain it to you. Haven't even really had time to digest the white paper, but people are very excited about the potential for Bitcoin to be essentially have its own virtual machine. So that being said, I do think there are certain things that Bitcoin still can't do and may never do. So, I'm bullish just generally on the entire space, and look forward to working with everyone to advance to make sure that no matter what comes out of the Bitcoin digital asset space, that America is a leader on it.
Dennis, I'll quickly add, if you're ever in Cheyenne, you can go to the farmer's market and buy your baked goods and produce using Bitcoin and Lightning Network.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
And let me just kind of throw this out as just a general question. And I mean, what do you see in 5 years? And looking out 5 years in the areas of stable coins, Bitcoin. Obviously, we're using Jack Mahler with Stripe is using basically converting dollars to Bitcoin, sending them internationally, converting back to the local currency at that point. So over Lightning, bypassing the federal, certainly the current infrastructure, but still has to run through a U.S. bank at some point or another. So, David, I mean, obviously, and then we get into the whole idea of rehypothecation of these assets. I mean, where do we go from there? David, I'll throw it back to you.
Wow, that's I'm when you're talking about rehypothecation, which means the splitting of assets into various components and then doing different things with them, that's something I'm leery to kind of predict how that will happen. I'm not a fan of rehypothecation in a lot of instances because that's what's gotten our banking system where it is now. One thing about the Wyoming stable token is that it is matched to the dollar, and it would be very, very difficult to rehypothecate that. Now, if down the road we create a municipal bond and bundle it together, create a municipal bond, then you can watch the splitting of that into an interest component and a principal component, and having both sides sold separately, and those types of situations. Then the lending of the stable token, again, I think that may be something that we would see later on, where there would be a stable token bank that would then lend out the stable token, but that really does not affect the core product that we're talking about, which is a product that truly is a different type of delivery for the same dollar that we always use. So 5 years from now, my hope is that the state of Wyoming has $100 billion in tokens outstanding. That's what I'm looking at right now. Anthony, what about you?
Sounds like I got my work cut out for me for going that way. One of the things to double down on, we talked a bit about the Wyoming SPDI structure earlier in the conversation. I mean, those banks those charters specifically, were built around not being able to do rehypothecation, also on bailment, right? So they're kind of the best way to make sure your money is actually in the bank. And I think most people think their money is in the bank, so I regret to inform you, that is not quite the case. So, that's something that has certainly been addressed in some of the statutes out here. In terms of scope, yeah, I think, the stable token market is a $125 billion market today, in one of the lowest kind of bear markets we've had in the broader Web3 space. If that is to pick back up, and I'm not one of these people who thinks, oh, the bull market's around the corner. If there are enough, from my perspective, tools that make using Web3 assets a lot easier, I do see a lot more activity coming on chain, and it's going to need a stable mechanism of transfer behind it, and that's where stable tokens come in. So, I think someone cited a stat the other day that Circle is generating as much money on what they hold in T-bills as the Ethereum network is generating on gas fees, right? And that's, Circle is smaller than Tether in the stable token space. And if we come up with a product that is, in some way, shape, or form superior to either of those offerings, it becomes pretty quickly. So let's build that. We'll grow from there. And this becomes a method by which we're able to, build back up the US dollar's status as a world reserve currency, which has had some hits to it of late. I would love to see that as kind of the key performance metric for us over time.
Andrew, yeah, I mean, for Andrew, looking at this from the CBDC standpoint, obviously part of the problem we have is the constant printing of money. There's nothing backing it. The full faith and credit of the United States, obviously. How does that look from a CBDC standpoint? Wyoming is using treasuries to back their stable coin. Where does it stop? I mean, obviously they're providing full reserves at the Speedy Bank level, but that's not necessarily mirrored at the federal level. I mean, you want to take a stab at that? I mean, that's really kind of getting a little off topic from where we started, but certainly where this conversation is going.
Yeah, so I want to make a couple observations. During my research and a lot of the studies and papers that I've read recently, I have started to notice that the world is going back to a first, second, and third world system where you'll have the world being the West and its allies and their financial system. And then you'll have the second world being the East allies, their financial systems being the CBDCs, um, and a lot of their bridges there. And then you're going to have the third world, which are countries like El Salvador and things like that that don't generally want to rely on one system or another, but have their own decentralized finance, such as, living on Bitcoin and denominating a lot of their currencies and that, and using those rails there, whether it be, a certain stable coin on Lightning or something like that. So we're moving back into a first, second, third world um, environment. And then to go from there, I mean, central bank digital currencies are going to be completely left up to either Treasury or the Feds. And the central banks basically will control the supply. There's programmable money where they can adjust interest rates in real time, almost instantaneously, right? So looking at this in the future, CBDCs have great potential and at the same time have great risk for personal privacy and things like that. They promise increased efficiency and speed. Payments occur depending on the method, either peer to peer or wholesale, being bank to bank, things like that. Uh, I mean, it's going to really be up to the different model they use. Earlier in the conversation, we talked about the four different models: the retail, the wholesale, the hybrids, and then the synthetic. Which I'm starting. The more and more I look at it, there's probably going to be a fifth one where Wyoming stablecoin will live.
Well, we are right at the 1:25 hour, and which officially leaves about 5 minutes for questions. So, we've got a lot of different folks in the group here. If anybody has a question, I'm just going to ask you to kind of raise your hand at this point, and we'll continue the conversation. Also note. Daniel Diaz has joined us, and he's involved in an asset-based stable coins. So, just to utilize that as kind of a jumping off point, I'm going to leave my last question, which the constitutional challenges here. We can address that at another time. But potentially as a asset-based stable coins are beginning to seem to be really a focus in so many areas. We know also, I mean, even Zimbabwe, we haven't really even touched on the African continent, but they've recently announced CBDC that would be backed up by their natural resources. All of these, these are all permutations on the same technology in so many areas, trying to make our money worth something. And expedite payments and basically create frictionless transactions that are not held up by a T+2 settlement time frame. So in the long run, I mean I can see where we'll have stable tokens that are competing for customer base, perhaps on yields, similar to what we saw, with the recent, rise and fall of some of the stablecoin products that are out there. But how does that, where does that leave a state, from a competitive standpoint, David?
Again, I think once we are up and running, the biggest competition we will have is if other states begin to do the same thing and are able to do it as well as Wyoming. Statutorily, the requirements that we have are very stringent, and we will follow those. Any private stable token will have a use. but because of additional perceived risk in those, they will, I believe, eventually begin to have to provide a yield. Wherever there's risk, there should be a yield, and right now the fact that the marketplace isn't demanding that shows how useful really a stable token is for the purposes of international settlement and moving money around and all of that. So I think in the future, the biggest competition Wyoming may have down the road will be other states that are statutorily as firm about the backing as Wyoming is.
And I may weigh in on that, obviously, because we are looking at legislation ourselves for in South Carolina to propose, with a that would require a gold and silver depository. Obviously, language that would, then reflect how that, can be utilized for creating a state-backed stable coin, an asset-based stable coin. So, all of these things, I mean, are part and parcel of where we're going with it. But, needless to say, I mean, you guys are out in front right now. You're the lead outside of the currencies that we know that already exist, or Bitcoin, specifically. But Dennis, you have a question?
I just to mention that I think that there's going to be a really strong surge or an attempt by states to adopt stablecoins as a technology. We sort of see at Satoshi Action that there is a return to the way things used to be. We have a dual banking system here. We used to also have banks that would issue their own form of money. Well, we sort of believe that it's probably very likely that there will be state-owned banks that will issue their own stable coin, but more or less that'll be like an extension of the state. That's like a slow walk process. Currently, we think it's more important that we provide an avenue for states to create institutions that will protect the transactions that take place between digital asset companies and really the world. As we've seen throughout the space, there's been a lot of digital asset companies, particularly Bitcoin mining companies, have been debanked, which is sort of not a new term, but it's the fact that it's even being popularized is very concerning, considering that we're in the United States, where if you're a legal business, you should be able to legally operate and have a bank account where you can pay your employees and be able to pay payroll and pay your electrical bills. But so many Bitcoin miners have been debanked, and I'm sure a lot of you are aware as well that many others in the digital asset space have been debanked as well. So we're really interested in crafting policy around this. We're coming out with a paper actually, which drops today, will be its first big deadline, where we talk about what states can do to help advance themselves and position themselves to absorb this type of new banking that might take place or may take place. The paper itself will outline a menu of items that states can pursue, a menu of policy suggestions that states can pursue in order to position themselves where the long arm of the federal government is minimized and diminished, because it's not just us that needs to worry about being politically disfavored in the Bitcoin and digital asset space. There are many other folks that in different industries that are politically disfavored, whether they be on the left or the right. I'm sure you can immediately think of a few issues in your head where you are concerned about that industry, having its access to banking restricted, whether they be on the right with, a gun store owner, or whether it be on, the left with someone who is concerned about reproductive care. So it's one of those issues where we believe that the federal government shouldn't be in the business of deciding who gets a bank account and who doesn't, who has access to banking and who doesn't. So I just wanted to pause there. I do have to hop here in a minute to another call, but I just really do agree with Dennis that this is the direction that we're headed in, and that states should be preparing themselves as best as possible, with Wyoming obviously leading the charge, but every state should be doing its best as possible to try to make sure that we find an angle to outmaneuver the long arm of the federal banking mafia. That's what I like to call it anyways.
Yeah, and I'll add, one of our members, coder, has read the USDC code, and is, clearly identified that token is recallable. I mean, it could be turned off. It could be, it could be shut down. David, are there protections in the Wyoming legislation against that, or?
No specific protections, but in my opinion, the Wyoming stable token is best used when Wyoming creates it, then quote unquote wholesales it out to other organizations that then distribute it. It will have to follow all of the regulations, but there is no specific way in which Wyoming can, in the legislation, in which Wyoming can recall a token. It will have to be redeemed. It will have to be, and Wyoming can't specifically go out and say, Dennis, you purchased too much coffee last week. We are cutting you off from the stable token. It is not subject to the whims of any political environment that I can conceive of right now. And the other thing, the effort to debank whole industries is what really created the Wyoming Special Purpose Depository Institution. We weren't, at least on my part, we weren't specifically going after the digital asset community, though that is the highest and best use of the Speedy right now. The Operation Choke Point back in 2013 created an environment where pawnbrokers, gun dealers, the advanced check industry, there were 13 different industries where the federal government pressured in conjunction with the FDIC, basically told banks that if you bank any of these types of industries, you will be under extra scrutiny. Well, what does that mean? And the banks took it as a warning, as they should, that if they bank them, they will receive extra attention, extra audits, extra, and so those industries were debanked in mass because of that, including the digital asset industry. So that's what, in Wyoming, what swayed a lot of the lawmakers toward creating a state bank that could not loan out funds, so they would derive all of their income from fees that could then bank industries that may be politically out of favor. We can't bank anything that is illegal, any industry that's illegal within the state of Wyoming or federally. So, so we can't do the marijuana industry or anything like that. But other legal industries can find a haven within the Wyoming banking system once the Speedy banks are up and running.
Daniel has been waiting patiently. Want to introduce Daniel Diaz, one of our members and the Legislative Affairs Director for Citizens for Sound Money. Daniel?
Hey, Dennis. I was promoted to Executive Director effective October 1st of Citizens for Sound Money.
Appreciate the
I'm
correction.
sorry. Sorry, I'm driving back from Tallahassee for Sound Money Act. I have a question about the stable coin that Wyoming. I came in late. I got a text message from George, so I hopped in late. I think I missed some details about the stable coin. Is it going to be backed by a specific asset?
Yes, Daniel. The legislation requires that it be backed 102% by U.S. Treasuries or dollars on deposit. So it will truly track the value of the dollar throughout the system. And by the way,
my follow-up question is, go ahead.
Oh, sorry about that. And I wanted to just clarify that it is a stable token, not a stable coin. A coin in itself implies the state of Wyoming is creating its own currency, and we are not doing that at all. The token represents $1 on deposit with the state of Wyoming.
Right. So I'm guessing you guys have a legal opinion on how it doesn't violate
You're breaking up there a little bit. I'm not sure if that came through.
I'm sorry. I was asking, do you guys have a legal opinion that I'm guessing the Attorney General, do you have a that this token that you are minting is not violating the Constitution, Article 1, Section 10, because for our own bill, the reason why we're pushing an asset-backed digital currency backed by gold and silver is because Article 1, Section 10, Clause 1 gives the states the constitutional right to make gold and silver legal tender specie. This token would be, in a sense, of the dollar, which I see some constitutional questions there.
Okay, so the legislation was constructed with that in mind, and as a matter of fact, back in 2018, I wanted Wyoming to create its own digital currency, and after analysis, I was told that that could not happen because of the constitutional constraints. So over 5 years, we've taken a look at it, and we've constructed around the fact that this will be a digital delivery of a U.S. dollar, not Wyoming's currency. And then my second point to that is that states are also allowed to issue debt instruments. And this most, in my mind, and you'll have to read the disclaimer that is in the chat, but in my mind, this most closely resembles state debt because that is issued with no expectation of and no indication that there will be a return on that debt by the state. So each token represents $1 on deposit with the state and is a debt that the state has to fulfill. States are allowed to issue debt. States are allowed to issue or allowed to use gold and silver as specie. But states are not allowed to create their own currency. We are in the middle of working through the legal side of that debate right now. And we expect, I would expect that the debt argument wins. Now, I am an eternal optimist, and we will see how it all turns out, though.
Okay. And what is the relationship between the deposit backing these tokens and the person who actually holds these tokens? Is it a trustee relationship or a Bailey relationship where the state is just holding the currency while the person who owns the token actually owns the right to those dollars?
Okay, we are getting a little bit into the weeds on the legal side for that, for me to really speak intelligently on it. So if Anthony is still here, I'd refer that question to him.
Okay.
But the state, by statute, is required to redeem those dollars when presented. Now they may be held by third parties, third party exchanges, which is probably going to be the case, or may be the case. We haven't decided on anything yet. The commission is still working through these issues, but by statute, the state is required to redeem those when presented.
And David,
Okay.
therein lies, Daniel, therein lies the opportunity for us to segue into our conference in April. David, you've certainly been invited, as well as Anthony, and we are scheduling a CBDC stablecoin panel. So, and we did not get into the constitutional issues of that. That was one of the questions that, I'd hoped to get into, but it is a complex situation, and depending on what Congress does, will certainly dictate, what stable coins may actually look like. I mean, regardless of what the states want to do, we will at some point or another, we should get direction from Congress. And so, on that note, I'm gonna go ahead and thank everybody for participating, and certainly leave the door open, to continue this conversation as a jumping off point for our conference. And I want to thank everybody for attending. I want to make everybody aware that we did have a little technical glitch in terms of getting in. We'll try to work on that. I also want to remind everybody that November 9th is the next e-session in our series of lunch and learns leading up to the Bitcoin halving. That'll be we'll be focusing on the Catawba digital economy zone with their executive director Joseph McKinney on November 9th. We'll also be posting a full list of our e-sessions, very soon on the website and on Eventbrite. So I want to thank everybody for coming. If there is for everybody attending, we have a special discount code of SETA, SCETA 21 for 21% discount off our membership, and actually we have a combined membership and event ticket on our South Carolina Blockchain Week store. So had to get a shameless solicitation in here, and nonetheless, I want to thank everybody for participating, and look forward to having everybody join us in November for the next in the series. And also, just a quick reminder to anybody in the South Carolina area or plans to be in Charleston this weekend, we're kicking off our first Bitcoin meetup in a new home at the Charleston Distillery, and have a little taste of El Salvador there by being able to use your Bitcoin to pay your tab. And I may even have a little El Salvadoran whiskey there, just on the sideline to add to the Charleston Distillery product. So I want to thank everybody for coming, and certainly everybody's participation. Look forward to everything that's coming down the pipeline, all the exciting things that are happening in this industry. So we're gonna weather the storms. I mean, you can't fight the disruption. That this you might slow it down, but it's coming. We've already seen it happen. So with that, again, I want to thank David, Anthony, Andrew, Dennis Porter, and Abstentia, and everybody that joined us today.
Thank you, Dennis. Please note that Anthony posted the legislation, the link to the legislation, the stable token legislation, in the chat. Follow that, and you will be able to read the whole thing. It's not very long, and it is really quite simple in its terminology. And I think everyone needs to take a look at that.
Thank you, David.
Thanks, David. Thanks, Dennis.
Andrew, any closing remarks?
No, I look forward to seeing what Wyoming has in store and how it plays in the entire worldwide market. It's an exciting initiative, and I think it can bring a lot to the table. I mean, one of the most dangerous thing some of these central bank governors have said is rapid dollarization through stable coins and stable tokens, right? The deputy governor at the Indian Bank is terrified of that. Their economy is rapidly dollarizing through USDT. It can only, the more and more we adopt this, the more and more the dollar will continue to be a dominant force in the world.
Great. Well, thank you very much. And I posted the link to the website ticket sales for the event in the chat. Everybody should be getting copies of the AI notes. I believe that's automatic. So, and if you don't receive them and you want them, just feel free to reach out to me. So, again, want to thank everybody and look forward to seeing everybody, in April and certainly online in between. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Hey.
I've got my peeps here. Anybody want to chime in while we're together? George? All right, I'm going to go ahead and tear it down. We'll look forward to chatting with y'all tomorrow morning.